It was just an ordinary day, or at least that's how I thought it was going to be. I was running errands, finishing up some work, and simply trying to enjoy a few minutes of quiet. But little did I know, my peaceful afternoon was about to take a bizarre turn, all because of a parking spot. I live in a neighborhood governed by an HOA, and while I've always found the rules a bit strict, I typically don't mind. The people in charge are all well-meaning, I guess, but some of them take the rules way too seriously. And then there's Karen, the self-appointed guardian of all things HOA. She took it upon herself to keep an eye on everyone, making sure the grass was trimmed just right, that no one had their trash cans out too early, and, of course, that every car was parked in its designated spot. Now, normally, I wouldn't have paid much attention to her. But this time, Karen was about to learn that messing with the wrong person can lead to some serious consequences. The whole thing started when I had parked my car in a spot near my own house, one that I've used for months without issue. But apparently, there was something about that specific spot that rubbed the HOA the wrong way. It wasn't a designated guest spot, or so they claimed. I didn't realize this right away. It's a parking area near the entrance to the neighborhood, and I've always parked there when I needed extra space, especially during busy weekends when guests come by. The spot seemed fine to me, but Karen didn't think so. She saw my car parked there one morning, and from that moment on, things started to spiral. A couple of days after I parked there, I got a notification in the mail. It was from the HOA, informing me that I'd been fined. The fine was for $79, not a huge amount, but still, it felt completely unnecessary. The letter said I had violated HOA rules by parking in a spot that wasn't intended for homeowners. The funny thing, I didn't even know there was a designated spot I was supposed to use. But Karen, of course, knew. And she wasn't going to let me get away with it. It didn't end with the fine. Oh no. The letter also mentioned that my car was going to be towed. I remember reading it and feeling my stomach drop. The HOA had arranged for the tow company to come and pick it up. I couldn't believe it. I'd barely even had time to respond to the fine, and now, I was going to lose my car too? I tried calling the HOA office, but of course, no one was picking up. The automated voice just kept telling me to leave a message. So, I left a message, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't help. This wasn't just some random mistake, this was Karen making sure I paid for my disrespect of the neighborhood rules. It was clear to me now that she'd gone straight to the HOA and pulled whatever strings she needed to get my car towed. Frustrated, I grabbed my keys and headed outside. When I reached my driveway, I couldn't see my car. I walked around the block, hoping maybe I had parked somewhere else by mistake. But no, it was gone. At that point, I realized I wasn't just dealing with a petty fine. I was dealing with something much bigger, someone who thought they had the power to dictate everyone else's life. And Karen? Well, she thought she could just make me pay up and get away with it. But what Karen didn't know was that I wasn't just a regular homeowner. No, I wasn't just some guy she could push around. I was the chief of police. And when she decided to go after my car over a $79 fine, she didn't realize the storm she was about to unleash. I could have let it slide. I could have just paid the fine and moved on. But Karen was playing a dangerous game, and I wasn't about to let her win. This wasn't about the $79. It was about principle. It was about standing up to someone who thought they could use their position to make others' lives miserable. So, I decided to take action. Little did Karen know, she was about to get a lesson in who exactly she was messing with. I wasn't going to let this slide, not after the way Karen had acted. The more I thought about it, the more furious I became. Karen wasn't just an overzealous neighbor. She was the type who relished in her little power trip. I had dealt with her kind before, but never quite like this. Usually, people would leave me alone or at least show a little respect. But Karen, she went all in. I got in my car, mind racing, trying to think of what to do next. I had to find out where they'd towed it to. I drove straight to the towing company, hoping they wouldn't try to give me a hard time. The whole way there, I kept thinking about Karen and how she probably thought she had one. To her, it was probably just another day, another car to tow. She had no idea she was messing with the chief of police. When I arrived, The towing lot was a mess of cars, some old and some barely worth the time. But I spotted mine right away. There it was, parked among a sea of other towed vehicles, looking sad and abandoned. I walked up to the desk and waited for the attendant to notice me. He looked up, expression blank. "I'm here to pick up my car," I said calmly, though inside I could feel my blood boiling. The attendant looked at me, didn't recognize me, and shrugged. "Do you have your paperwork?" I handed him the paperwork from the HOA, the fine they had issued me. He took it, skimmed it over, and said, "It'll be $79 for the release fee." I could feel the irritation building in my chest, but I kept my cool. "I'll pay the fee, but I'm not leaving here without a full explanation of why my car was towed in the first place." He seemed a little caught off guard but nodded, typing away at his computer. After a couple of minutes, he finally turned the screen toward me. "Here you go. The tow was requested by the HOA. They said your car was illegally parked." "Illegally parked?" I repeated. "I've been parking there for months." He didn't have an answer for that. He just gestured to the door, waiting for me to pay. The whole thing felt like a pointless transaction, like they were just going through the motions, and I was just another customer they didn't care about. But I wasn't just some regular person. I was about to make sure the people who set this whole thing in motion knew exactly who they were dealing with. I paid the $79 without a word, then walked out to my car, still fuming. The adrenaline was starting to fade, and now all I could think about was Karen. I knew she was probably sitting at home, smugly watching the neighborhood, feeling like she had one. I wasn't going to let her have that satisfaction. Once I was in my car, I pulled out my phone and immediately dialed the HOA's number. No voicemail this time. Someone picked up after just a couple of rings. It was the same voice I had heard in the previous message, that same robotic-sounding employee who clearly had no idea who he was talking to. "Hello, this is the HOA. How can I help you?" I didn't even bother with pleasantries. "I just paid the towing fee. My car was towed by your request. I'm the chief of police, and I'd like to know why this happened." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could practically hear the gears turning in the person's head as they tried to figure out if they were talking to someone important or just another upset resident. Finally, he cleared his throat. Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience. I'll need to check with the board." I didn't let him off the hook. "You do that. But you should know, I'll be contacting the towing company and reviewing the records. If I find any foul play or wrongful towing, there will be consequences." I hung up before he could respond. I could already hear Karen's voice in my mind, no doubt trying to justify what she had done, acting like she was doing me a favor by enforcing rules that weren't even clear to begin with. The thought of her thinking she had authority over me, someone who could actually make her life a lot harder, made me laugh. But I wasn't about to laugh in front of her. I wanted her to feel the full weight of what she had done. I knew I needed to handle this carefully. This wasn't about the fine or the inconvenience. It was about sending a message that no one, especially someone with as much ego as Karen, could treat others like they were beneath them, especially when they had no idea who they were messing with. I wasn't just going to let her get away with it. I was going to make sure she learned a lesson she wouldn't soon forget. After the phone call, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of satisfaction and irritation. It was almost like being in control of the situation, but still, something gnawed at me. I knew I wasn't done with Karen, and honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to be. She had taken something small, a simple mistake, and turned it into an absolute headache, all because she thought she had the upper hand. That was the real issue. She didn't just want to follow the rules. She wanted to enforce them like she was the neighborhood sheriff. And I wasn't about to let that slide. I spent the next few days gathering my thoughts, figuring out exactly how I was going to handle this. I didn't want to just send an angry email or make an empty threat. That wasn't my style. I needed to go in, strong, and make sure Karen knew exactly who she was dealing with. She thought she could push me around. Well, it was time to show her that I wasn't someone who would take it lying down. I pulled out my phone again and started going through the HOA records. As the chief of police, I had a few channels I could use to get what I needed. I didn't want to go overboard, But I also didn't want to let this slide. I found a couple of things that didn't sit right with me. Things like inconsistent fine records, people being towed for minor infractions, and a couple of notes from residents who felt like the HOA had overstepped their boundaries before. It wasn't just Karen anymore. This was about the whole system. I couldn't let this go, not when it was clear that something wasn't right. It wasn't just me who had been affected. Once I had everything I needed, I set up a meeting with the HOA board. I wasn't going to approach this like some angry homeowner looking for a fight. I was going to present the facts, clean, clear, and professional. But even as I prepared myself, I couldn't help but imagine Karen's reaction when she saw me walk into that meeting. I could already see her face, the moment when she realized the person she'd just tried to bully into submission was actually someone she should have been a little more careful with. The day of the meeting came, and I walked into the HOA office, feeling completely in control. I wasn't just representing myself anymore. I was standing up for everyone who had ever felt powerless against people like Karen. The board members were already sitting there, looking down at their papers, talking in quiet murmurs. I walked in and introduced myself, and there was an immediate shift in the room. You could feel the tension. One of the board members, a woman I hadn't seen before, looked up from her notes and smiled politely. "Chief, thank you for coming in today. What can we help you with?" I could tell she had no idea what was coming. I placed the papers in front of them. "I've been reviewing some of your records," I began, keeping my tone calm. "And I've noticed a few irregularities. Not just with my towing incident, but with the way certain fines and penalties are being enforced." The room went quiet. They shifted in their seats, exchanging glances, unsure of how to respond. I wasn't making accusations, not yet. But I wasn't letting this go, either. "First," I continued, "I'd like to understand why my car was towed for something as minor as a $79 fine when I've been parking in the same spot for months. This wasn't clearly marked, and there was no warning given." I could feel the eyes on me now, the realization starting to sink in that they weren't dealing with just another frustrated homeowner. The board members shifted again, flipping through papers, looking for an answer. They had nothing. "I'd also like to point out," I said, "that I've been reviewing your fine records. Several residents have had similar issues. Towing, fines for minor things that could have been resolved with a simple warning. Not only that, but I'm seeing discrepancies in the way fines are being assessed. I think it's time for a review of how things are being handled around here." I paused, letting my words settle in the room. Karen, sitting at the far end of the table, was silent. I could see her shifting uncomfortably in her seat, trying not to meet my eyes. It was clear now, she had no idea who she had been messing with. I didn't need to say much more. The room was already on edge. They knew they were in trouble, and Karen's smug little reign was crumbling before her. The board began to murmur among themselves, talking about how they needed to make sure things were handled better, more fairly. I stood up and looked around the room. "I don't want this to escalate, but I'm not going to let you continue to treat residents unfairly. Not under my watch. Not when I know what's going on." I turned and walked out of the room, knowing the message had been received. Karen had no idea what was coming next, but she would soon find out. She thought she was untouchable, that her little HOA games would work forever. But she didn't realize she'd picked the wrong person to mess with. The next few days were strange. It felt like the entire neighborhood was talking, but not about the usual gossip. It was about me, about Karen, and about what had happened between us. Everywhere I went, I could feel the eyes of the other residents on me. Some of them smiled and nodded, probably happy someone finally stood up to Karen's antics. Others, though, kept their distance, unsure if they wanted to get involved in what had turned into a neighborhood drama. But I didn't mind. In fact, I kind of liked the way things were shifting. I'd gotten a call from one of my neighbors, a man named Greg, who had been in the community for years. He was an older guy, always quiet, but he had seen a lot of the HOA's tactics over time. When he called me, he made it clear that he wasn't happy with the way things had been run. He didn't know me personally, but after hearing about the situation with Karen, he figured I'd be the kind of person who'd want to do something about it. He had some stories of his own, Incidents where he'd been fined for trivial things, like having a tree branch overhanging into the sidewalk, or when his kids were outside playing too late, making too much noise. It was clear that Karen wasn't the only one with a chip on her shoulder. The HOA, it seemed, had been overstepping its boundaries for years, using petty rules to control the neighborhood. And I wasn't about to let it continue, not when I could do something about it. I decided to take action. I'd already spoken to the board, but that wasn't enough. I wanted to make sure that this wasn't just a one-time thing, a small victory that would fade into the background. I needed to make sure the residents knew they had a voice, that they didn't have to be afraid of Karen or the HOA anymore. So, I started making calls, getting in touch with other residents who had been pushed around. And what I discovered was worse than I thought. People were being fined, towed, and harassed for the smallest things that weren't even worth the trouble. The HOA had been making money off of these fines, using them as a way to control the community. And it had all gone unchecked for far too long. I spent the next few days preparing for another meeting, but this time it was going to be different. I wasn't going to sit back and let the HOA spin things to make themselves look good. I was going to expose everything. I pulled together all the information I had, all the stories from the other residents, and I made sure to have every detail ready. This wasn't going to be some casual complaint. This was going to be a full-blown investigation. When the day of the meeting arrived, I wasn't nervous, not even a little. In fact, I was looking forward to it. I wanted to see the look on Karen's face when she realized this wasn't just about one person anymore. This was about an entire neighborhood coming together and taking back control. I walked into the HOA office with all my paperwork, a stack of complaints, and a list of questions that I was ready to ask. The board members greeted me, but I could tell they were already a little uneasy. They knew what was coming. Karen, of course, was there too, sitting at the far end of the table, her arms crossed defensively. She didn't even look at me when I walked in, and I could tell she was trying to act like nothing had changed, like everything was still under her control. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I stood up, calmly placed my papers on the table, and looked around at the board. "We need to talk about what's been going on around here," I began. "This isn't just about my car being towed anymore. This is about a pattern of abuse, of residents being harassed and fined for the smallest things, without any real justification. This needs to stop." Karen's face flushed red, and I could see her jaw tightening. She knew what was coming, but there was nothing she could do to stop it. I've spoken to several residents who've been fined for things like tree branches or noise violations, things that don't even come close to breaking any real rules. And from what I've seen, this isn't just a coincidence. It's a pattern. A way to extract money from the people who live here. That's not what this HOA is supposed to be about. The board members were silent, looking down at their papers, not meeting my eyes. Karen, though, had finally had enough. She stood up and started to speak, but I cut her off before she could finish her sentence. "I'm not done," I said firmly. "I've spent the last few days looking into this. I've spoken to the residents, I've seen the records, and I know what's been going on. You've been using petty fines to control people, to make money, and it's not right. I'm not here to make empty complaints, I'm here to make sure this stops." There was a long silence as the board shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Karen opened her mouth again, but this time, no words came out. She was completely stunned, unable to respond. I could tell she wasn't used to being challenged like this, and it was clear she had underestimated me. But that was her mistake. She thought she could pull the strings and get away with it. I wasn't about to let that happen. I was going to make sure this whole thing got the attention it deserved. No more hiding behind petty rules and fines. It was time to take action. And with everything I had gathered, I was ready to fight back. This was just the beginning. I stepped out of the building, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone in that neighborhood who had been pushed around, ignored, or silenced by the very people they trusted to uphold the rules. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But it was the first step toward something better. And for Karen, I knew it was only a matter of time before her world came crashing down.